Our next speaker is Elizabeth Kittrie. Elizabeth is a strategic advisor for data and open science at the National Library of Medicine, or the NLM. Prior to joining the NLM, she served as a senior advisor to the associate director for data science at the National Institutes of Health, where she led open innovation efforts, including the Open Science Prize, a collaborative partnership between the NIH, Wellcome Trust, and Howard Hughes Medical Institute. Elizabeth has also served as senior advisor to the Chief Technology Officer of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, where she led data, access, and open government activities across the department. Prior to joining federal service, Elizabeth was the first associate director for the Department of Biomedical Informatics and the associate director for strategic initiatives at the Biodesign Institute at Arizona State University. Please join me in welcoming Elizabeth.
Great. Okay. All right, well, thank you. And on behalf of the National Library of Medicine, I'm pleased to be here and excited about how many people are excited about this burgeoning field of open data. So my talk is titled Advancing Health Through Open Data. And I'm going to focus on the increasingly powerful role that open data is playing in advancing health, healthcare, and biomedical research, both in the US and abroad. So today, there are many sources of health data that the federal government makes openly available. And I'm going to focus on the data resources and the data strategies of the National Library of Medicine. The National Library of Medicine is one of the oldest and most trusted sources of health information in the United States. For many people, consumers, students, researchers, health providers, it is the primary gateway for health information. So my presentation today, I'm going to focus on the following. Define open data as it relates to health and federal policy. Introduce you to some of the major NLM data resources, some of which you're familiar with, some of which you may not be. Share with you examples of how the data we make available is being used to benefit health and healthcare and biomedical research. Showcase how NLM is enabling an ecosystem around open health data through engaging a variety of communities, very much what Stephanie talked about. And update you on new directions for the National Library of Medicine, which include an increased focus on data and open science. So I'm going to start with a basic overview of what do we mean by open data as it relates to health and federal policy. So in its broadest sense, open data is data that anyone can access, use, and share. And increasingly in the digital age, when we talk about open data, we're talking about data that can be consumed not just by humans, but also by machines. It's important to note that when we talk about health data, there's a spectrum from data that is freely accessible to the public to data that is open only to members of closed communities like health maintenance organizations. And in the middle is semi-open data that is typically available to researchers under controlled conditions. Privacy and confidentiality considerations play a major role in determining where health data sit on that spectrum. So just to give you an example of what I mean. Weather data is freely accessible by the National Atmospheric and Oceanic Administration, and that's really truly open data. Other types of health data, such as clinical data, may be available only to those who sign data use agreements. So if you want to look at data.gov, that has some excellent definitions and explanations of what we mean by open data when we're thinking about it from a federal perspective. So during the last decade, opening up the vaults of government data has been a major policy initiative. And there have been a number of federal policies that are moving the default from government information as being closed to government information being open. And there are a couple of initiatives I'd like to mention. So the first is the Open Data Policy, which was issued in 2013, and it called for all government-funded data to be released in open and machine-readable formats. This was a landmark policy and has shifted the way the federal agencies conceptualize data from its early beginnings to dissemination. Currently, and there was a question about this before about sort of views of open data, there's a bill in Congress, the Open Government Data Act, which proposes taking the contents of that 2013 open data policy and making it law. This is a bipartisan bill that was just recently proposed, sponsored by Senators Sass and Schatz and Representatives Farenthold and Kilmer, and it's one we are watching closely at NLM and in the federal open data community. And finally, on the research front, there's an important initiative that's advancing data sharing. So in 2013, the White House issued a memorandum to the heads of executive departments and agencies titled Increasing Access to the Results of Federally Funded Scientific Research, also known as the Holdren Memo, which calls for the data and publications stemming from federally funded research to be made publicly available. So making publications available is something that NIH has been doing since 2008. But the expectation of data sharing is new. And this is certainly a new policy for nearly all of the 22 scientific federal agencies. Over the past 3 years, as a result of that memo, agencies have developed implementation plans for expanding public access to their federally funded research. And many are in the process, and I'm going to talk about this during my remarks, the process of implementing policies and procedures, including the NIH. So the Library of Medicine. We're located on the NIH campus in Bethesda, Maryland, and we've been an important source of health information long before open data ever caught the attention of policymakers. The National Library of Medicine was an early advocate of open data and open science, spearheading NIH's leadership in making full-text publications available through PubMed Central and making genomic data available through databases such as GenBank. So the Library of Medicine is one of 27 institutes and centers at the U.S. National Institutes of Health. With our budget of $32 billion, we are currently the largest single funder of biomedical research in the world. And as I'm going to touch on later in the talk, the National Library of Medicine is playing an increasingly important role in coordinating data and open science efforts across NIH. So the core mission of the Library of Medicine is to acquire, preserve, and disseminate biomedical knowledge, to develop a workforce of the future, and to support research and development in biomedical informatics and library science. The work of the Library of Medicine is amplified by the 6,500 libraries that are part of our national network of libraries of medicine. The Carrera Library, which is part of the greater Midwest region, is one of those important nodes. So there's a great quote from Carla Hayden, Librarian of Congress, on the importance of libraries and the role they play in supporting healthcare infrastructure by connecting people to information. And she says, health information is just about the number one thing that people go to public libraries for. They're also looking for information about things that can make their lives better. And as more and more data and health information become available as a result of open data policies and public access plans, a key issue for the National Institutes of Health is creating the infrastructure to make data open and data shareable. So there's a quote here from the NIH director, Dr. Francis Collins, speaking at a symposium we recently ran at the NIH on open data, on the importance of creating infrastructure to make our health data accessible. He says, I'm speaking as a funding agency director. We need to be sure that we are making appropriate investments in the infrastructure so the increasingly large deluge of data that people will be interested in is actually accessible. So I provided some context for the library's work in open data, as well as some of the broader perspectives on NIH data. I'd like to showcase some of the examples of the kinds of open health data we have and how that data is being used by individuals, by communities, by researchers to improve health and healthcare. So NLM has over 300 open data resources, and I'm going to focus on 6 of our most utilized resources. All right, so one of our oldest and most renowned open data resources at NLM is PubMed and its suite of tools. And as a university library, this is a resource familiar to you. PubMed provides free access to the 27 million citations from MEDLINE, the life science journals, and online books. PubMed Central provides free access to over 4 million full-text articles. So these are among our most utilized resources at the Library of Medicine. On a typical day, 1.6 million users run 3.1 million web searches and view more than 8 million records using these sources. Now, earlier I had mentioned the Holdren Memo, which requires the results of federally funded research to be deposited into publicly accessible repositories. So starting this year, a number of other federal health agencies beside NIH will begin requiring funded investigators to deposit articles into PubMed Central. So this is going to include the Food and Drug Administration, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, the Agency for Community Living. In addition, we also expect non-HHS agencies to put their literature in this database. The Veterans Affairs, the National Institutes of Standard and Technology are just two of the other agencies that are going to start using PubMed Central as the main repository for storing their investigators' publications. The contributions of open knowledge from our sister agencies will undoubtedly enrich the biomedical corpus at PubMed Central. We see this creating new opportunities for users to be able to link data and information from an increasingly broad range of fields funded by federal taxpayer dollars. So the fellow featured here, Jack and Zarqa, is an exemplar of the benefits of making the literature freely available. Jack was a 16-year-old high school sophomore when he developed a quick and inexpensive method to identify early-stage pancreatic cancer. As he talks about this in his video, which you can watch on YouTube or the NIH director's website, much of the data he accessed for his prize-winning research was accessible to him because it was openly available without paywalls. And Zarqa is a great example of innovation that can arise from unexpected sources, like a high school student, when anyone with curiosity, determination, and an internet connection has access to the published literature. So in terms of open data, one of the changes we're anticipating in the next year is the ability for researchers to be able to direct deposit their data in support of any PubMed Central article as a supplement. This change should greatly enhance the utility of the literature and the ability of scientists to leverage the knowledge contained in the text, as they will have the ability to directly interact with the underlying data. So a second source of open data I'd like to talk about is MEDLINE Plus. MEDLINE Plus provides health information on diseases and conditions for a broad range of public health topics, from child abuse to high blood pressure. MEDLINE Plus puts together information on diseases, symptoms, and treatments in easy-to-understand language in both English and Spanish. This year, we hit the 1,000 mark in terms of the topics covered in MEDLINE Plus. This repository is used by over 1 million people a day, and it's one of our most popular open data resources. Later in my talk, I'm going to give an example of how we're using APIs to connect this valuable source of information to the patient's electronic health record. So the third source of open data I'd like to mention is the Visible Human Project. It's one of our longest open-running data initiatives. Through this effort, we make available anatomical images of the male and female human body. So the story of the Visible Human Project is kind of interesting. Two very different individuals decided to donate their bodies to science for this project. The man was a Texas death row inmate, and the woman a Maryland housewife who died of a sudden heart attack. In both cases, their bodies were frozen, sliced, and electronically scanned into digital files that have been made publicly available around the world. These virtual human images have been used to develop a wide array of products and services. Over the past 2 decades, approximately 3,000 licenses have been granted to organizations and individuals across the world to use this source. So this slide represents just a few of the many products that have emerged as a result of open anatomical data. VoxelMan is a state-of-the-art surgery simulator. The tool is developed by engineers at the University of Hamburg and is used to train surgeons. The tool simulates the haptic feel of a real pointer and allows complicated surgeries to be rehearsed ahead of time. Another application of this anatomical data includes the development of a computer algorithm to perform a virtual colonoscopy. This means that a doctor needs to perform a colonoscopy only when absolutely necessary, which can save patients time, money, and unnecessary discomfort. So in addition to these examples, we have numerous other examples of software programs and apps that have been developed from these images. And we list them on our website, have the link here, if anyone is interested in learning more about what's being done. So a fourth example of open data relates to clinical trial data. And I know there's going to be a presentation later today about clinical trial data. So clinicaltrials.gov is a registry and results database of both publicly and privately supported human clinical studies conducted around the world. So currently we have over 240,000 clinical studies registered from all 50 states and nearly 200 countries. This tool can be an incredibly powerful resource for patients who want to find and join clinical trials. The tool can also be powerful for researchers who want summary information on completed trials. So we expect the contents of this database to further expand this year, thanks to a recent HHS final rule and NIH policy on clinicaltrials.gov. So one of the important changes will be that all investigators conducting clinical trials funded in whole or in part by the National Institutes of Health will now have to have their trials registered and their results submitted to clinicaltrials.gov. The second change relates to the type of summary data required. This will now include data on race and gender, among other elements. So we anticipate these changes, both the magnitude of who has to submit and the types of data collected, will greatly expand the contents of this already valuable and well-utilized resource. So a fifth example of open data I'd like to touch on is GenBank. The National Center for Biotechnology Information, housed at the National Library of Medicine, curates hundreds of databases related to genomic, proteomic, and chemical data. One of our most popular resources is GenBank. So GenBank database provides an annotated collection of all the publicly available DNA sequence data. GenBank is part of the International Nucleotide Sequence Database Collection, which comprises the DNA Databank of Japan and the European Nucleotide Archive. Data is exchanged between these organizations on a daily basis. This is also an example of a resource we have that is growing exponentially. From 1982 to the present, the number of bases in GenBank has doubled approximately every 18 months. As of February 2017, there's some 228 billion bases and 199 billion sequences that are publicly available through this resource. And as we enter into the era of precision medicine, where a person's genetic makeup can help determine the course of treatment provided, the applications of this data and the ability to link genomic, genotypic, and phenotypic data is going to become even more important. And so a sixth and final resource I'd like to mention relates to pill identification. The Institute of Medicine estimates that at least 1.5 million preventable adverse events occur each year within the healthcare system. And one of the major issues can be pill misidentification, especially by the elderly. So NLM developed Pillbox, which is a public domain library of more than 8,000 images of pills, which covers nearly more than half of the pills available in the US marketplace. Users can log on to this tool via the web or a mobile app that we've created to identify pills based on their color, shape, size, or inscription. This is a tool that is being used by police officers and poison control centers across the country when they need immediate information to identify mysterious substances. So recently, NLM has partnered with the Department of Veterans Affairs to expand the applicability of this tool to the armed forces. So I could go on and on about the 300 databases that we make available, but I'm now going to switch gears and address the role of government in enabling uses of health data. And I'm going to reflect some on what Stephanie has talked about, which is that making data openly available is a first step, but it's not enough. To be truly useful, health data needs to be consumable, and the community needs to be engaged in using it. So you're probably familiar with Joy's Law, which states that the smartest people don't necessarily work for your organization. Right? And across HHS, we take a stance that an important role of government is to make information available and let those who specialize in the uses of data, so companies like Google, like Amazon, the citizen science hackers, the biomedical researchers, let them take our data and create tools and products that can be generated more nimbly than anything that can typically be done through the government bureaucracy. So I'm going to give you some examples. But much of the work at the National Library of Medicine and the NIH overall is undergirded by the FAIR principles. The notion that to maximize the utility of data, data need to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And I'm now going to share some examples of how NLM is seeking to incorporate the FAIR principles into our data efforts and engage the community around our data. Okay, so earlier I had talked about MEDLINE Plus. And my first example relates to the uses of APIs, or application programming interfaces. So MEDLINE Plus is a valuable source of health information on over 1,000 health topics. And one of the exciting ways in which we're taking those data and making them accessible to patients and providers is through a program called MEDLINE Plus Connect. And this tool, which is built on an API, helps patients and providers access health information from MEDLINE Plus through patient portals and electronic health record systems. So how it works is MEDLINE Plus Connect accepts electronic requests for information on diagnoses, medication, and lab tests through the API, and then returns health information from MEDLINE Plus. So a second example of how NLM is seeking to engage the communities in using data is through our common data elements. And this is, I guess, sort of the equivalent of the Mozilla lingo bingo. So what is a common data element? Well, a common data element is a data representation that is common to multiple data sets across different studies. And right now, it's a bit of a wild west, with organizations and researchers using different data elements and different terms. So that means that a phenotypic response can get coded in one way by research study X and another way by research study Y. And in an effort to help improve data collection and allow for easier aggregation of data and facilitate data comparisons, we've developed a publicly accessible repository of common data elements. This repository, which is publicly available, can be a useful source for those looking to develop standardized measurement tools or compare the results of different research studies. So my third example relates to a literature commons. Earlier in my presentation, I had spoken about the PubMed suite of tools, which provides access to literature citations. One of the new approaches we are piloting at the National Library of Medicine is the PubMed Commons, which was recently rolled out as a way to engage users in open information. So using PubMed Commons, you can comment on anything in the PubMed system. This tool is being used in lots of interesting ways that are facilitating open discussion around the contents of the literature. For example, researchers can use this tool to make connections and learn about related works. Journals can alert readers to errors and revise text and data in near real time. And user communities can spark best practices. So for example, one researcher commented in a recent post that it's hard to reproduce literature reviews. And that led one university library to set up guidelines on how literature reviews should be developed. The use of PubMed Commons has been growing since it was first launched in 2014. There are currently 11,000 people participating who have posted more than 6,000 comments. So hackathons. This was talked a little bit about Stephanie, and that is another way that NLM actively involves the user community in creating tools to maximize our open data resources. So I'm going to give you an example from the NLM context. The National Center for Biotechnology Information at NLM, which maintains the genomics databases, ran a hackathon last month. And this was open to a wide range of participants, which included librarians, students, researchers, federal staff, and developers. We put out an open call for interested parties to build pipelines for analyzing large bioinformatics data sets within a cloud infrastructure. 6 teams were selected by NCBI, and these teams came from all over the country and all different kinds of backgrounds. And they came to the NIH campus for 3 days to build tools that were published as open source in GitHub. And I'll tell you why we at NLM like hackathons. Because we find them a powerful way to build new resources that can enhance the utility of our databases. So through hackathons, people have built APIs to connect data sources. We like them because they promote new avenues for non-traditional scientists to engage with our data resources. We've had, what's been fabulous in the hackathons we've run, we've had even federal staff participate from other agencies who just want to get into data, who want a way to learn. And you can build expertise in open data among interested communities. So participants in the hackathons tell us that hackathons can be important resume builders, especially for those who want to break into data science and open data, but they don't have any formal data science training. We have a couple of hackathons coming up for anybody who's interested, or if you have communities of researchers that are interested. You can check out our NCBI GitHub website if you want to see what's coming up. We have a hackathon in late May in Colorado and one in New York for anyone who's interested. So another tool that we piloted last year was the use of a challenge competition to stimulate the use of new products and services using open data. And a challenge competition is a relatively new mechanism for government, at least federal government, which, unlike a grant or contract, allows us to specify a goal without saying how the solvers have to get there or putting limits on who can participate. So for this particular competition, the Open Science Prize, we partnered with 2 other organizations that are interested in promoting uses of open data. This was the Wellcome Trust in the United Kingdom and the Howard Hughes Medical Institute in Chevy Chase, Maryland. There were 2 phases to this competition. In the first phase, we asked teams of solvers from around the world to submit ideas for how they could use open data to advance biomedical research or public health. And then in the second phase of the competition, we provided 6 teams with 80,000 to develop prototypes. And I'm pleased to say, and I'm actually delighted and surprised that Mark Honnell is here from Figshare, and he was one of the expert advisors who assessed the prototypes. So this was our first time running the competition at NIH, and we had no idea what to expect. We were delighted to receive 96 solutions from 450 solvers from across the globe. These solvers represented 45 countries across 6 continents, demonstrating the interest in open science and open data around the world. The solutions submitted to us really covered a wide range of uses for open data, from making FDA's drug application packages searchable to international platform for assessing and comparing air quality measurements across the globe. The winning prototype for this competition was the nextstrain.org prototype, and it's actually gotten quite a bit of coverage in the news. And this is a tool that develops real-time phylogenetic trees from genome sequence data to combat Ebola and other infectious diseases such as Zika. What's novel about this tool is that it can be used to detect migrations of diseases over time and over space. So you might wonder, how is that an innovation over current practice? And right now, if a researcher wants to trace the evolution of a virus, it can take years to collect the data to answer this question. And that's because sequence data tends to be localized and data are scattered in repositories all over the world. As funders, we felt this innovation amplified the true power of open science and the public health benefits that come from sharing information on a global scale and compiling open data. So a final example I wanted to highlight is an NLM funding opportunity titled Personal Health Libraries for Consumers and Patients. And this is a funding opportunity that is currently available. So the idea behind this funding announcement is that as more data is made available, and individuals and providers must decide what kinds of health information should be kept. To address this issue, the National Library of Medicine is seeking applications for novel informatics and data science approaches that can help individuals gather, manage, and use data and information about their personal health. So examples of the types of projects that would be eligible for this funding opportunity announcement: the construction of a personal health library, methods for managing a personal health library, or the creation of a digital library assistant. Applicants are encouraged to take advantage of NLM's open data resources, which include some of the ones I have just highlighted today, like PubMed Central, MEDLINE Plus, or clinicaltrials.gov. Grantees can win up to $250,000 per year over the course of 4 years, and there are 2 rounds of submissions. So the first round is just about to close, but the next round of letters of intent are due February 16, 2018. So if this is something that would interest you or your communities, keep this in mind. Okay, so now I'm going to switch gears from talking about ways we engage the community around data to the strategic planning efforts at the National Library of Medicine, which are highly focused on data and open science. So 2 years ago, the Advisory Committee to the National Institutes of Health Director did a study considering the future of the National Library of Medicine, given changes in the biomedical research landscape. And it was determined that given NLM's expertise in data curation and management, its history with making data resources openly available to sources such as PMC and GenBank, and its role as a trusted intermediary, the library could play an important role in catalyzing open science and serving as the epicenter of data science across NIH. So in response to this study, NLM is undergoing a major strategic planning effort. It's a multifaceted process that includes panel discussions with national experts on 4 thematic areas that I'll talk about in a moment. A public request for information, which some of you may have submitted responses to, and we're currently analyzing those. NLM staff visioning, inputs from the NIH-IC directors, and functional and physical audits of key areas such as outreach and our physical space. So we anticipate a public release of the plan by the end of 2017 once it's approved by our Board of Regents. So the 4 thematic areas that are driving strategic planning at the National Library of Medicine, the first relates to advancing biomedical discovery and translation. And as I mentioned, we have a panel of experts helping us to think through ways that the library can advance biomedical discovery and translation, particularly through its data efforts and expertise in advancing new areas of research. So I think the picture here of a researcher with a computer is apt. Across NIH, we are finding that discovery is increasingly data-driven, and data reuse and data analytics are driving discovery. The second area relates to advancing data science, open science, and informatics. And one of the aspects that's unique about the National Library of Medicine is that not only do we provide open data resources to the community, but we also engage in research and development in data and informatics. So areas of active research at the library include development of clinical data standards, visualization tools, and natural language processing, just to name a few of the areas. We anticipate that the research portfolio in the areas of data science will be expanding in the coming years. The third thematic area relates to supporting the public's health. For this area, we focused on the role of the library in improving the lives of individuals, communities, and populations. As the role of the National Library of Medicine in the 21st century shifts from a physical location to a digital presence, there are new opportunities for the roles that we as the library and our network of libraries can play in supporting health and reaching out to communities. And we're exploring what some of those ways can look like. And the fourth thematic area relates to building 21st century collections for discovery and health. So the digital age is making us rethink what it is we mean by collections. And there was a question about digital collections in terms of the nature of what we collect, how that information is stored, and how we deliver information. So in addition to these vertical themes, we also have a number of cross-cutting themes that we're looking at in all 4 of these areas. And these include things like research needs. How does a library support a 21st century through R&D? These are things looking at research funding. What is the appropriate balance for intramural and extramural funding at the library? Infrastructure. How do we support the growing deluge of data? Standards. The National Library of Medicine has a rich history in leading standards development. What are some of the new areas where standards are needed? And certainly, one of them is around electronic health record information. Workforce development. A data-savvy workforce is becoming increasingly important, both the development of data-savvy librarians and data-savvy researchers. And the library is and can play a major role in workforce development. Another cross-cutting area relates to the user communities and community engagement. So as both I talked about and Stephanie talked about, it's really important to engage communities around the data. And we're looking at not only who are the usual communities, but what are some of those other communities that ought to be knowing about the library's resources, and how can we engage some of the non-traditional solvers such as citizen science in our data. Educational outreach is another cross-cutting theme. The library has long played an important role in conducting educational outreach, and certainly data will be a focus of this outreach. International engagement. The National Library of Medicine plays a key role in providing health information, not just in the US, but abroad. And how do we capitalize on that role? And finally, health disparities. The library has long played a role in reducing health disparities. And really the question before us is, how do we use the information of the library to further reduce disparities? So our director, Patty Brennan, who recently joined the Library of Medicine, posts a weekly blog giving insights into her thinking about new directions for the library. She covers many topics about the growing importance of data and the role the library will play at the interface of knowledge and medicine. Under Patty Brennan's direction, a key theme for the library will be meeting users of health information wherever they are, which is not necessarily a fixed place or a static point in time. and making our data resources as consumable as possible to as broad an audience as possible. So I encourage you to check out this blog and keep in contact with it as we evolve through our strategic planning process for revisioning of the library. So to come full circle, today I've talked about what do we mean by open data from the federal perspective. I provided snapshots of the kinds of health data the National Library of Medicine makes openly available. These included PubMed suite of tools, MEDLINE Plus, clinicaltrials.gov, the Visible Human Project, GenBank, and Pillbox, just to name 6 of the 300 data resources we make available. I also provided some examples of the ways in which NLM is engaging communities around open data. So this includes uses of APIs, uses of common data elements, uses of literature commons, hackathons, challenges, and funding opportunities. I've also provided some insight into the strategic planning process with our emphasis on data and open science. So I'm excited about the future of the library and its role in serving as an enabler of open data both in the US and around the world. When data is made open and available, it has the potential to transform how we understand health and how we interact with the healthcare system. And as you've seen today, open data can lead to new products, new discoveries, and new ways of engaging individuals, communities, and populations in their health. So here's my contact information. If any of you are at the Library of Medicine, please feel free to come visit. We do fantastic tours of the library and our data resources. And certainly feel free at any point if you want to reach out and have questions about the library. I'd be happy to talk about it. And I'm happy to take questions now or during the break.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Sure.
I actually have 2 questions. The first you had mentioned about researchers being able to deposit data into PMC.
Yeah.
Back when the before NIH's open access policy, it was hard to get researchers to voluntarily deposit their articles. And I'm wondering, how are you going to entice them to deposit data which they hold very tightly?
Right, so that is a great question. And the question of research incentives is something that we are thinking a lot about as part of our strategic planning efforts. I don't yet have the answer, but I think that, you're certainly hitting on something that you can't just create a tool. You don't just create a tool and data just doesn't magically appear. I will say, though, that I think increasingly there is a recognition in the research community that in certain areas data needs to be shared to advance the domain. So I think increasingly, and especially as younger researchers receive funding from NIH, I think we're increasingly seeing an openness to it, but it's an excellent question, and it's one we are thinking about, and I look forward to, if there's a seminar 2 years from now, coming back and being able to share some concrete examples of the ways we're using carrots and sticks to make that happen.
Thank you. My second question is, how is NLM incorporating or working with the NIH's Precision Medicine initiative, if you are?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and we are in close contact with now they're called the All of Us Research Project. We're in close contact, and we will be supporting them both through our data expertise around repositories, vocabularies. That is a project, though, that is, it's really just in its infancy. There's been a lot of visioning, and so we are going to be working closely with them as the data comes into the cohort and as the databases are being developed. So tight linkages, great question. Again, in 2 years, I'll be able to give you more specifics on how the interactions are going.
So we have a project at the University of Houston where we're trying to get real-time data from community residents about air quality.
Excellent. Mm-hmm.
Have you done anything to facilitate projects like that we can look at as a prototype?
So that's a great question, and actually I mentioned the Open Science Prize, and Mark can certainly tell you a little about this too. One of the winners of this prize, one of the finalists, was a project called OpenAQ, and they are doing something just like that. It's a worldwide repository where they are linking together environmental data. So I could certainly put you in touch with that team. I think that would be a great example of a team that's done it and been wildly successful. Okay, we'll do that offline.
Do you have any concern that the executive order, the Holdren memo, might be overturned?
So that's another great question. I don't have a crystal ball. Now, in the case of NIH, the 21st Century Cures Act, which was passed, mandated data sharing. So as far as NIH is concerned, we believe that data sharing will be an expectation, and we're sort of covered under a different set of laws. But as to what happens to the Holdren memo long term, I'm not sure. That said, a number of agencies are underway with implementing sort of policies and procedures, and it is beginning to happen. And we are starting to see the data sharing into PubMed Central and some of the data deposit.
Okay, I think one final question before
Sure.
our break.
I noticed that the Open Science competition had applications from all over the world, which
Yep.
was fantastic, but that the 6 projects that ended up winning were in countries that seem to be more traditional collaborators with the US, like
Right.
Australia, France, Canada. And I was wondering if you have any ideas about, how to make sure that those collaborations happen with countries where, that infrastructure might not exist, or
Yeah.
just new partnerships,
So you are asking a great question, and I think that's interesting, because if we run another Open Science Prize, one of the things we're going to emphasize is how do we get to the really non-traditional solvers? And I think part of it has to do with outreach. I mean, honestly, I think that part of it has to do with the way we advertise the prize was through the NIH channels, the Wellcome Trust channels, and Howard Hughes Medical Institute channels. And so the people that read that are the traditional researchers. I think if we do this again, we're going to have to figure out how to partner with some of the grassroots Mozilla collaboration. Right, this is who and actually Kate Thaney was one of our advisors, but we are going to need to partner more with groups that are out in the community, so this gets to non-traditional solvers, and like the Jack and Dracas of the world, students, the non-usual suspects.
Great, thank you so much.
Great, thank you.